Hi, I'm Tim, he's Brian, and welcome back to From the Vault. We are the team with the theme, and today's theme is bracelet watches. Guys, this is a live show. All of you in the chat, we're going to be interacting. We want to hear your thoughts and questions. Brian has selected 3, I've selected 2. Let's roll straight into how to contact us. Brian, if someone sees something they like on the show, what do they do?
They can reach out to me directly at brian@thewatchbox.com. You can reach out to either one of us on Instagram. You can reach out to, I believe it's Tim at the TM.
Mosso.
Mosso at thewatchbox.com.
There we go. We got a graphic for that. All right.
Look at that.
Eddie
Fast
Landsberg. We've got Busser, PT, David B, Sam K, Eric Nielsen, Monkey C Production joining us from Chicago. All right, let's jump straight in. This is one that Brian didn't select, but this is his watch. He's all about this watch, and he's going to tell us about it.
So here we have the FP Journe Centigraphe Sport in titanium on a titanium bracelet. So you've got the new style ceramic bezel, 44mm watch, bright yellow dial. This particular iteration of the watch has since been discontinued, and the reason being is these bumpers here on the bracelet, which Tim will get into in a little bit more detail. You also have the bumper there on the side. The most recent version of the watch, they got rid of the bumpers completely. So it's now just a solid titanium bracelet with platinum accents on the side in place of the bumper, as well as the crown itself.
Now, what I love about these bumpers is that they work. First and foremost, they work. The first Line Sport Centigraphe arrived in 2011. Those were aluminum watches, very fragile finish, and yet we see them today, and it is a rare example that has any kind of scratching, scuffing, or gnashing on its surface. So in my opinion, the bumpers were not just a nice tonal contrast, more so on the aluminum than the titanium, but they do really work to maintain the quality of the finish and the detailing of the finish. You can see this clasp area where a lot of watches go desk diving under your wrist. This timepiece is absolutely immaculate, and a lot of that is down to the rubber on the clasp itself. Now, what's nice about this particular watch is it has the bright yellow lacquer dial, which would be my preference. Another important feature of these Line Sport models is that they are loomed, but not in the way you expect. The numerals that look a lot like printed features are actually solid blocks of luminova, and the closer you get, the more you realize they are three-dimensional, so there's a wonderful third dimension and a height to the loom of this watch. Another big change with the Line Sport, compared to the standard Centigraphe, which was the GPHG Aiguille back in 2007, this model, with the same movement but a different dial, gets rid of the tachymeters on the sub-registers. You've got a 1/100th of a second foudroyant, and then you've got a 20-second dial, and then you've got a 10-minute dial. You have a 360,000 vibration per hour secondary escapement underneath the foudroyant. You cannot see that on the standard watch. You can see it on this model. Let me take a quick look here. This one needs a little bit of a wind. It's got an 80-hour power reserve unless you run the chronograph full time, in which case it is 24. Okay, now let's jump to the movement. We'll see the foudroyant one more time before we jump to the next watch. You can see that this is an aluminum movement. Now, the movement itself has not changed since the original 2011 Centigraphe Sport. Let me get that bracelet out of the way. That is one of the challenges. Our theme today is bracelets, but bracelets make it tough to record a case back. So you can see the whole movement is aluminum with a nickel anthracite coating. So with the case and bracelet in titanium and the movement in aluminum, just like the original, it is a very, very light watch on the wrist.
And another feature that I think goes somewhat unnoticed unless you have the watch in the flesh is, even though it's a 44mm watch, because it doesn't have traditional lugs, the watch itself actually fits moderately smaller. So it probably fits more like a 42 or 43mm watch that you would be used to. And I think that it's important, right? Because they transitioned the case to going from 42 to 44. Some folks thought that that may be a little bit too big, but just because they're used to the prototypical 44mm watch, but that's just not the case.
Yeah, this is nothing like a Royal Oak Offshore or Rolex Deep Sea. He's correct. It is also very thin, as you can see, under 11mm thick. It's sliding under my cuff, and I'm not even making an effort. So while the watch is exuberant and sporting, it is viable as a dress watch. If you want to wear this with a tight sleeve, you're going to have no problems at all. It is far thinner by over 1 millimeter than a Rolex Daytona, so really impressive on that count.
Yeah, good pick.
Okay, let's jump to one of yours. Let's do
the Octo Finissimo.
Thin sports watch.
So, a watch that I'm a big fan of since its launch. Here we have a Octo Finissimo in all stainless steel. This is the most recent iteration of the watch, featuring the black dial. And For me, any episode about talking about bracelet watches now has to feature the Octo Finissimo. Super supple bracelet. In particular, I just want to focus on that clasp because it is just exceptional. They integrated the clasp into the bracelet itself so as not to create a thickness there at the bottom so that the bracelet can stay streamlined on the wrist and remain thin. And for me, it's just genius, and I can't believe more brands don't do this.
You can see how once the bracelet swing arm is recessed into the revetment in the links, it is almost exactly as thick as the links, so it's flat and flush against the wrist. It is a very smart system, and a lot of times brands will simply farm out clasp and bracelet design to contractors, and the clasp is often what gets short shrift. Here with the Octo Finissimo, the designers put as much thought into the clasp as they did into the watch. Still 40 millimeters, still stainless steel. The big difference last year, in addition to this combination of polished and satin steel, was a screw-down crown and 100-meter water resistance. So whereas the previous watch was a push-down crown and splash only at 30, this is a real swimmable sports watch. A lot to love. It's just over 6 millimeters thick, so while it's about 1.5 millimeters thicker than the original, you can still see how flat it is. It makes the Journe, which is a thin watch, look like an absolute double cheeseburger. It's broad across the wrist, but it's not large from link to link. Across the wrist, it has a lot of presence, but the actual rigid span is only about 46.5 millimeters. So you can see that bracelet pulls straight down. It can be quite narrow when it wants to be. Small wrists are encouraged here. Now the movement is still the BVL 138. You can see it uses not tungsten, not gold, but a platinum micro rotor. It's got a 60-hour power reserve, and we're doing a good job here getting the focus, maybe a little bit more on the Côte de Genève, get the movement itself. You can see that it is over 36 millimeters in diameter and only 2.23 millimeters thick. All that with a real-world power reserve, and the movement's not built into the case back, which is to say you have a regular display case back, and no tricks, Piaget style, have been performed to make the watch thinner. As a result, you have the ability to see that for which you've paid, and like an Audemars Piguet movement, it's a nice combination of hand finish and mechanical finish, so it really is a high horology watch. A very cool piece, and again, 100 meters, water resistant. Now, this is the version to buy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best part is that you can swim in this watch.
Yeah, we got a 100-meter Breitling right here, and this is a fairly aggressive sports watch. That could be your dress watch. That's a really great option as an all-arounder. The one thing it doesn't have, and I hope Bvlgari does something about this in the future, is a loomed dial option. So
that would be cool.
That would be very cool. This is more graceful, though. A lot of folks say that elegance is an unloomed dial, and Bvlgari has evidently taken that opinion. But Breitling decides the more the merrier, and we have a rainbow panoply of Superluminova on this Breitling Superocean Heritage 57 limited edition 2. Now the original was the black dial rainbow. Shortly thereafter, for a sort of COVID benefit charity function, this watch came out in 1,000 pieces, and this is a rock star watch. First of all, it is also under 11 millimeters thick, so while it's a dive style watch, it is not chunky. 42 millimeters in diameter, that's only true at the edge of the bezel, meaning if you look at the case itself, you can see the watch where it's more like a 40 on the wrist. Now, it is designed after the 1957 vintage Breitling reference 1004, the first Superocean, and it channels the design elements of that watch from the shape of the indices to the broad hour hand to the use of a slightly concave and inverse conical bezel profile. By the way, ceramic bezel insert, really cool watch, an unusual conforming profile to the Stabe mesh bracelet. A lot of times these mesh bracelets use straight bar linkages. This is an unusual and attractive innovation. Pop open the clasp, throw it on the wrist. It is a chronometer. It is 100 meters water resistant. It is not an ISO dive watch, and I'll show you why in a moment, but what it is absolutely gorgeous. And of the watches on the table today, I love the Bvlgari, but if I were to pick just one to stick with long term, I think this is the most versatile, a truly upbeat and cheerful watch as well. It's the kind of joie de vivre and elan we hope for in a watch, because that's what motivates us to collect. It's fun. Now, this is why it's not an ISO diver. In the spirit of the original, which featured a bidirectional bezel, this one features a bidirectional bezel. So while it is loomed and you can use it for timing, light-duty diving only, this is not a life-saving instrument. Lovely piece, not a whole lot to see on the case back, I'll show you, but they watched it on 1957 was the bomb. Great year for American cars, too.
Yeah, no, fantastic watch. And, you know, since Breitling released their version of a mesh bracelet, whereas you can remove the links from the bracelet itself, as opposed to having a more traditional stylized mesh bracelet where it sort of folds over. I think this just makes it a lot more comfortable and easy to wear, and it doesn't scare away as many consumers as perhaps the mesh bracelet on the IWC Portofino did in the past. The watch itself, I think, beautifully executed. I thought the rainbow was a really cool direction for them to go in. They're not the first brand to utilize a rainbow color scheme. They're certainly not going to be the last. This watch was the second iteration of that launch. They did a 250-piece edition in black to crazy success. And then as a result, they then launched it in the blue as well in 1,000 pieces. Just a great, quirky Breitling that to me I thought was just a lot of fun.
All right, we got our friends in the box right now, Wolfgang Kohlerer, who has one more day of quarantine, from what I understand. All the best, Wolfgang. I hope things are all right there. And we've got James H. asking, does the case on the Octo Finissimo feel rigid? Hello from Toronto. Welcome from the Great White North, James. Yes, it feels rigid. There is absolutely no flexibility in the case, and there was no flexibility in the original watch. It's thin, but it's not freakishly thin. We're not talking like the Dinosaur. We're not talking like a Piaget Altiplano Ultimate, where you have to like be mindful of the strap tension because you could bend the case. You can't. Is that true? Yeah.
Wow.
There are some Piaget watches that are so thin historically, they've actually popped crystals because people have strapped them down too tightly.
Wow.
I would still love to own the Altiplano Ultimate concept. Piaget, please don't break up with me. And then right here we've got Randy Allen saying, for some reason I find these Octos very attractive, this one most of all. There's also a very cool blue dial version of this watch, which is very voguish, but I still love the blue dials. They're such a pander, but I still like them. What do you think of blue dials? Are they played out?
No, I mean, again, there's only so many utilitarian dial colors that I think make a watch transitional and ultra wearable, right? So like once you get outside of a silver dial, a black dial, and a blue dial, you start verging on the fringe, right? Green is great, but you're not going to wear a green dial watch necessarily all the time. Salmon's great, but again, for daily wear, it becomes a little bit tough. So you really have, let's call it a white dial in there as well. So you want colors that you can wear regularly, and I just think that as far as a black dial and a white dial go, some folks want something a little bit more interesting, and blue came along. And again, it helped that AP had, the 15202 was blue and the 5711 was blue, and due to those watches' popularity, it really just spread throughout the industry.
Yeah, blue has always been around in the industry. The thing is, blue was traditionally reserved for white gold or platinum in the past. Like, for example, in 2008, Rolex was way ahead of the curve with the blue dial sub, but it was a white gold sub. And that's usually how blue was done in the past. Flagship models, launch models, prestige pieces, limited editions. What's different about blue today is, one, it's more prolific, and two, it's available on base metals.
Like if you think about AP for the longest time, blue started out as being, anybody could get it. And then it transitioned to boutique only. And that was when AP still had retailers. So even then, they were separating blue from the rest of the line as being special. And I think that when you do that for long enough, and when enough brands do that, blue gets the connotation of just being more special than other colors. And that translates to the rest of the industry. And, fast forward and enough time goes on and, lo and behold, blue's the it color.
I think when people see standard steel watches with blue dials like 20, 30 years from now, they'll say, gotta be like the 2010s. But I also think they'll say, objectively, it's still attractive.
Yeah, because they'll still be there.
All right, Ordinary 999 shouting out from Norway, Multi D Hill from Pennsylvania. Right here, we got Burning Mr. B in the snowing Netherlands, getting cold in the low countries. Tim G is saying he's a fan of the salmon dial, and I am as well. We have Mirko joining in from Zurich, and Matt Foster is in the box, so is James T, saying the 6711 might be green dial now. We know nothing. This is purely internet speculation. Do we want to address this?
What was the question?
This is a comment that there might be a 6711 with a green dial coming to replace the 5711.
So I've been texted this picture quite a bit today, and I've seen some posts online. Again, we don't know. This is all just speculation and hyperbole at this point. But they've since discontinued both 5711s. I believe an interview was done with Mr. Stern in which he talked about ending the 5711 with some sort of final version. Again, this is prototypical Patek. They tend to end flagship models with some sort of final version of the watch. So do I necessarily think that the next watch that comes out is going to be the 6711? No, I really do think that you're going to see a final version of the 5711 to end the series, and then at some point in the future, you will see something like a 6711. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the number. I don't know if that's what it's going to be called. That's what has been speculated. But another Nautilus time only will come about. I just don't know if it's going to be how soon it's going to come.
What I've found fascinating is that Patek Philippe has become more dependent on the Nautilus since the 5711 launched in 2006, when it was the sports watch you could buy along with your Calatrava. Now we talk about buying your Calatrava along with the sports watch, and it's become a much more central part of the brand's identity. So redesigning it might be a more involved procedure. I mean, it might be more important, take more time, and then they have to decide whether they want to do what they did back in 2006, which was to launch the entire Nautilus model line at the same time.
Correct. And I agree with you there. I think that there's more that goes into it than just launching another model. It's how does the model now interact with the rest of the line? Are you going to have you still have the 5712, you still have the 5726 in existence, you still have the 5990, so you have the predecessor version of this case and styling still in place. Are you really just going to launch one model on its own and have it be a little bit different? So, again, maybe they transition everything at once. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they've been planning this for many years now. This isn't something that just comes about. And I have to assume that a brand like Patek has a good plan.
And the thing is, Rolex and Patek are fundamentally different about how they roll out model lines and life cycle the model lines. Rolex, historically, though not recently, but historically, would launch the most expensive versions of a watch first. They would launch gold, they would launch platinum, and they would launch two-tone, and then later they would roll out the more affordable, generally steel versions. Patek is different in that they often roll out the most basic version of a watch up front, and then later on you get two different platinum 5711s, and you get Nautilus perpetual calendars and annual calendars. So they do operate a little bit differently. We saw that with the 5970, we saw it with the 5070, we saw it with the 5170 and the 5270 even, sort of reaching the end of its life. So Patek is different in that all of the crazy stuff comes later, generally as you sunset the model line. So their only real question now is how much of their annual volume do they want to dedicate to Nautilus over the next 2 years? Because this level of demand did not exist when they launched the last redesign of the model line.
I think that it's going to remain. I think that production for them is going to remain somewhat the same. Perhaps they increase it incrementally, but not by much. I think that they're comfortable with the way that it's going and they're happy with the results. You see some new technologies in current Nautiluses. So you see the new bracelets already. It's on the 5740, it's on the Lady 7118s. So unless they completely change that bracelet, you know that that's going to be the bracelet that they use on the next round of Nautiluses. Will there be a micro adjustment? That's something that I'm sure that they've looked at in the past that they may or may not include. What will the size be? Will they upgrade the movement? Now they just changed the movement around a year ago, so they probably will more than likely keep the existing movement. So I think that you can get an idea of where it's going to go, and they're just going to fine tune it and make changes that they've probably been thinking about for years now.
I would say the one thing, if you're holding your breath for like screw fixed removable links, it's not going to happen, because we saw with the rollout of the perpetual calendar, what really changed was the clasp, and what changed last year with the Nautilus was the movement. So I feel like they're ramping up to give us maybe a different dial and a slightly larger case, but I don't think ultimately they're going to make fundamental changes in those parts, which limits their amount of lateral motion. Like they don't have too far to jump from the standard 5711, given that the clasp and the movement are already spoken for. I think if they wanted to be really faithful to the original Nautilus design, it would be interesting to see the monoblock cases come back, but those disappeared a generation ago, and I'm not sure I can see Patek undertaking the difficulty of reintegrating those. We'll find out, guys. We'll find out. Let's talk about a Rolex.
Okay, so again, you can't have a bracelet episode without having a Rolex on the episode. And I thought nothing better than bringing just a Batman Jubilee. Classic Jubilee bracelet. Well, not necessarily classic, right? I mean, it's their most current version of a Jubilee bracelet, but just beautifully executed, different than what anybody else does. You know, you don't even need to look at the watch, but if you see this bracelet, you know exactly that it's a Rolex. So micro adjustments within the clasp. I think when they first launched the Pepsi on the Jubilee bracelet, there was a lot of surprise. You know, your normal consumer thought that it was just going to be just like the Batman. It was going to be an oyster bracelet. And when it came out on the Jubilee, there was surprise and also this feeling of I wish it was on an oyster. And only once it was fully launched and people got it on the wrist did they realize like how great it was on the Jubilee. To me, I'm a huge fan of these watches on the Jubilee. I think that putting the GMTs on these bracelets did a great job of differentiating them from the subs and other products within the line. And I'm just a huge fan. Like I just think it feels like an older, timeless watch that just in a modern case. I can't really explain it. I'm not good with the words like you are.
I think what you're getting at is that from 1954 with the first GMT-Masters right up until about 2008, the Jubilee was always a rarely chosen option, but again, omnipresent in the catalog as an option if you wanted it. As a result, we got used to one full generation of the GMT-Master 2 that did not include a Jubilee bracelet option. So in a lot of ways, the reintroduction of the Jubilee in 2018 and with this watch in 2019 was a bit of a throwback to previous generations of the watch in a very different look. When you think of those GMT ads from the 1960s, a lot of times you're imagining the watch with the Jubilee bracelet, and this watch has really returned to that, but with 100 meters of water resistance and a 3-day power reserve. Really fun piece, and a nice fit too. If you think that some of the bigger Rolex watches today, the Explorer 2s, the Sea Dwellers, the Deep Seas, they're just too much for you, and you're maybe not on board with the 41mm sub, I can tell you don't worry about that, but if you do, this is still a wonderful way to get into a 40mm Rolex. It looks 42 on the wrist, but it wears 40 ergonomically. Real fun piece. This bracelet, by the way, there are a couple of different versions of the Jubilee historically. When this full solid link design debuted on the 2005 Datejust, it was often dubbed the Super Jubilee because it has all solid center links. Now what I like about the Super Jubilee, you can see from this angle, it has a lot more porous ventilation opportunities as there are gaps between the links. You don't get this on the Oyster. For years you wore the Oyster because it was more durable for sporting use. But with the Super Jubilee, it's strong enough with the integrity to use as a sports bracelet, but it vents the way almost the way an open pore strap would. It's very comfortable, and the short cross sections of the individual links means it's very silky on the wrist. A fun piece all around. Two different black and blues, obviously. You got the old Oyster and you have the Jubilee. Different looks. I really think they're different strokes for different folks. You're going to like one or the other. I haven't run into many people who like both equally. Jumping into the box right here, we have Rodnova saying red is going to be the new blue. Maybe. Moser just launched a whole suite of red dials over the last 3 years. The dark burgundy, very good looking on the Pioneers, and I have a feeling you're going to see them proliferate across the industry. As ever, if Rolex adopts it, you're going to see a huge amount of copycat action. Or for that matter, Panerai. Panerai, for all of its foibles as a brand, has often been a style trendsetter, and especially with bronze. Okay.
And they did the green dial early on as well.
Yeah, they did green, they did blue. I mean, if you go back, there were Panerai with blue dials back in the early 2000s, so they were really forward-looking on that, and they spawned an entire generation of oversized sports watches with crazy crown guard designs. So there was that too. Question from Brand 700. Tim, do you think a Pan 0960, so a 960 Panerai Carbotech would be a good long-term tool watch? Only in the sense that Panerai watches tend to be fairly durable and Carbotech tends to hide scratches well. But if you're really going to beat a watch up, I can think of better options, starting with just about any Seiko or a Zinn with a Tegament case. I think Panerai is probably just a tool watch. I don't see it being a utilitarian type timepiece. A fine and durable daily, yes, but maybe not a tool watch. We've got Alec Tang joining in 2 a.m. in Hong Kong. Man, thank you for either staying up late or getting up really early with us, Alec. We appreciate that. And then right here, we've got 121 click bezel saying, looks so much better on an Oyster bracelet. Like I said, folks prefer one or the other. It is a very polarizing design. And then we've got Eddie Landsberg up in Harvard Yard saying the Moser Burgundy is amazing, and I agree with you on that, especially in its month-date form. James T, I like the Pepsi on Jubilee. The Batman, though, it's strange. All good points, guys. Dave V, considering a Hulk, your thoughts? Will prices continue to rise or come down to a more reasonable level? 20,000 is a little pricey. Hulks, not Kermits. Where do you think Hulks are going?
I think if the market stays on the path that it's on, I think you're going to see Hulks stay in line with where they're at, or if not, continue to appreciate. I mean, you have to assume, number one, there's no more that are coming into the market. Rolex isn't making anymore. So what's here is here. As those watches sell, there's less supply that's available, and some of that supply may just be more expensive supply, where sellers want higher prices, and if that's the case, the whole market rises. But you would then need customers selling into that market. So are customers going to trade in the Hulks? Are they going to just keep them knowing that they can't get it again? Time will tell, but I just think that the Rolex market in the way that it's at is here to stay. Now that the Hulk is gone, I don't see much change.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if anyone really loses at this point. I will say this, we've seen downward motion on a lot of the modern sub variants, like the 2020 sub. We've seen the no date, we've seen the standard black bezel, we've seen the two-tone start to come back down to earth compared to where they were last fall. However, the Kermit version has remained very, very strong.
Right.
But we are seeing a little bit more, I guess, maybe reason and a cooling of the temperature in the other 41 millimeter Submariner variants.
And that's, again, that's expected to happen. And any time that a brand like Rolex comes out with a new launch, there's that initial spike in price. And then as the watches get delivered and they become more available, that price tends to come down and then plateau at a certain point based on supply and demand.
Yeah, right now, if you just want a standard three-hand date Submariner, the market is not ridiculous. It's elevated, but it's not ridiculous. We got a friend joining in. We got Severin Leon joining in from Germany. Thank you for watching us this afternoon. We really appreciate that. And then we've got AC saying, at least in my lifetime, I believe the Rolex market will be here to stay. Guys, the thing to do is find Rolex models that you love that are not hyped. There are so many Rolex models, including right now in the catalog, that you can get with a short wait and no real markup. I think if you want a Milgauss, if you want a 36 millimeter Datejust, if you want a steel Yachtmaster 2, you've got real options, and you can get on board and have fun with that watch and be enjoying it like later this month, even if you place an order at a dealer. Things are getting a little bit tough with the GMTs, the Daytonas, and the subs you may have seen. And this is
Milgausses are tough too.
Milgausses are, but like we've got a couple in stock right now, and they're priced at roughly their retail. Like that's the market for a used Milgauss right now. I would also say, the Datejust 41 is getting a little bit tough, but if you want one in two-tone, you're probably just fine. So there are real and really cool options out there, as long as you don't have to have what everyone else has right this instant. Let's talk about a watch that very few people are talking about, but a great historical piece and the upsized model compared to the standard 39.
Yeah, so, when I was looking through the watches that we have available, I was thinking that Breguet just gets so little love these days. And in the past, we had brought on their sport pieces, and I thought, you know what, time to bring one out. So here we have the Type 21. This is their Flyback chrono, 100-meter water resistance, super luminova dial, aviation bezel. So just, again, an overall really nicely executed integrated steel sports watch with a bracelet. Is it groundbreaking? Not necessarily, but I think that it's just a beautifully finished product. And again, a product line from Breguet that goes unnoticed in the watch community, but a brand that probably deserves a lot more recognition than it gets.
This watch stands toe-to-toe with the Navitimer, the Speedmaster Professional, and the GMT-Master as a true original mid-century pilot's watch built to an order. It was a French military aviation contract, Type 20, that spawned the original Breguet pilot's chronograph back in the mid-1950s. And while others like Auricoste and Dodin also delivered for that contract, it was the Breguet Type 20 flyback chronograph that remained the most enduring and the best known of the series. So, while Breguet scuffles as a brand, and I regret that, the fact is this is a watch that is every inch the historical equal of the GMT-Master and the Navitimer, and it should be regarded as such. Now, the 3800 and the 3820, the Aéronavale and the Transatlantique, respectively, they debuted in the 1990s as a sort of reborn Type 20. This is the Type 21, launched in late 2003 for the 2004 model year. It's 42 millimeters instead of 39, but it preserves all of the underlying appeal, and it's got a lot to love. Let's take a look at this dial and pick apart the features. First, you've got a loomed bidirectional rotating aviator's timing bezel. It is a wonderful instrument if you want to time 2 events concurrently. We get a little bit closer and you can see that the watch features a radial index. It is a La Manna 1350 base doing business as Breguet caliber 584Q. So you've got this 60-minute register just like a La Manna 5100. This is a La Manna 1350 series movement, one of the finest cam lateral clutch chronographs ever made. It is also a flyback chronograph, so you have your centered 60 seconds and 60 minutes. You got chronograph hours down at the bottom, and then you have a 24-hour dial that gives you a distinction between, for example, night and day. So you've got 2 halves, 1 half night, 1 half day, and you know whether you're looking, for example, at like 3:31 a.m. or p.m. So there's a lot of functionality here, and that's before we get to the fact that it is 100 meters water resistant, and that is just not common on pilots' watches. You know, you ask IWC, what's your standard pilot's watch? 60 meters. You ask Breitling, what's your standard pilot's watch? 30 meters. 100 means that you can absolutely rock this thing while flying a seaplane and not worry about falling overboard after the landing. This watch has a lot going for it, a lovable piece, and very historically important. Charismatic too. I feel like if Breguet just doubled down on the old Marine, brought that back, and focused on this watch, they would have bomber strong brand.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Breguet Marine in its original iteration was a fantastic watch, and they upgraded the model. I think that it was better the way that it was before, but it's a testament to how strong the sports watch segment of the watch business is that the Breguet Marine doesn't get any accolades. So, and it's a watch that should, right? Like it should be on more customers' radars. Like they should tweak it and it should do better. So, to me, Breguet is really like a sleeping giant. Like I almost equate it to Vacheron in a way. You know, the brand should be a lot more powerful and robust than it is.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, you can put together an absolutely awesome collection of Breguet. You know, GPHG Aiguille, the 7727 Classique chronometry high frequency. Get yourself a 39mm Marine from the previous generation.
The tradition.
Guilloche dial, that's right.
Gorgeous.
The 7027 tradition, the 38mm from 2005. That is about as clear a statement of what a dress watch Breguet wristwatch should be in the modern era as anything I've ever seen. If you just get yourself a 7727 high frequency, a 7027 tradition, either a type 20, 21, or 22, and then the old 39mm Marine with the guilloche gold dials, that is a hell of a collection. You don't need another watch till the day you die, and you'd be satisfied. And you'd get every single one of them at like 65 cents on the dollar compared to its original retail. That, my friends, is value. Because we always give you more here at WatchBox. Brian, one more time for our friends just joining in. How do they reach out to us?
So they can reach out to either one of us through Instagram, Brian Govberg for me, Tim Mosso for you. They can reach out to you at tmosso@thewatchbox.com, or you can reach out to me at brian@thewatchbox.com.
All right, guys, thanks so much. Time out, Tim out, Brian out, watches out, and thanks for logging on.